Welcome to Risk Revolution, a podcast series that examines all aspects of risk management in the life sciences industry. We'll talk to industry experts on best practices for identifying risk, assessing risk, measuring solutions, implementing solutions, and monitoring results. Here are your hosts, Nuala Callan, Valerie Mulholland, and Laurie Richter.
Well, welcome back to Risk Revolution, our monthly series seeking to advance the maturity of risk management practices around the life science sector. As usual, we cover topics that challenge professionals within the biopharmaceutical and medtech industries. And we, as always, aim to shake up the paradigm to revolutionize the ways in which we perceive and proactively manage risk. And this week, we have the full team back. The band is back together with Laurie, Val, and I all in the hot seats today. And Val, you've been hot-footing it around this week. So you're just back from the KM Dublin Summit, which was hosted in the lovely environs of a historic seat of knowledge here in Ireland, Trinity College. What did you learn? Who did you meet? Let's have some gossip, Val, on this fantastic event.
Well, you're so right, Nuala. It's such a beautiful, beautiful location for anything, but particularly for a knowledge summit. It just seemed to be the right location. Well, let me tell you something. These are people that practice what they preach. Put a bunch of KM experts, specialists, managers together. And what are they going to do? They'll share knowledge in structured, unstructured, flip structured, every methodology possible. It was a wonderful, enriching, engaging experience, I'll have to say. Learnings, well, the theme of the summit was AI, knowledge management, and human experience. So there was a lot of discussion on the potential for AI to enable, faster, better, more productive knowledge flows. However, that was counterbalanced with concerns about trust and reliability, about the disruption that AI might deliver, how AI would capture tacit knowledge and experience, which seemed to be very critical in a lot of industries. There was some agreement that using AI agents rather than direct query might be better at delivering, unknown knowns to folks, making you aware of something you didn't know, but you could now find out, which mightn't come up in a regular search engine. So it was very interesting. I think the conclusion, this is my impression of the conclusion, there wasn't a formal conclusion, might have been that AI is transformative. It is going to be, very different. But really the value is when human intelligence underpins it. I think that was the consensus as I could see it. But ladies, I spoke about, linking knowledge management to risk management and to risk-based decision-making, and how AI can certainly, I kind of touched on how AI could certainly have that flow of knowledge to decision-making. But that idea of linking knowledge management and risk management and decision-making, it seemed somewhat a novel perspective there, and a linkage that didn't seem to have been discussed before. At least that was my impression anyway. So maybe theoretically, by mapping knowledge to the critical risk decisions and ensuring flows to those nodes, which is what we've been talking about, and Marty and the research we've been doing, maybe we're a little bit ahead of the curve. I don't know. I just found that kind of interesting. But another thing that came up quite a lot in informal chats as well, and maybe too this was in the light of AI and digitization, and I suppose the move from kind of more paper records to digital knowledge. Where is the best home now for AI? Was it in IT or L&D or in a strategic department? And, when I mentioned that to you, Nuala, I think it got our idea generator going for a podcast episode. Like, where is KM best suited, or is it kind of homeless at the moment with so many stakeholders?
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And I think that's really when you were when we were chatting the other day just about your reflections, it kind of left us thinking, well, is AI homeless or is it Is it almost moving around the organization, and certainly different organizations seems to home, even though the knowledge is spread across the organization. Who owns the KM strategy? Who owns the practical approaches? Who owns the program? Are there KM practitioners there? Is there training around how we become learning organizations that are knowledge led and enabled by AI? Because certainly, as you say, Val, lots of people are either welcoming or fearing AI, but certainly it's moving at such a pace, and we've been, oh goodness, 10 or 15 years talking about KM, and then suddenly AI comes along. And it's like the little brother who's like kicking the shins of KM. And we know that AI is not going to be the source of all knowledge, but it may, as you say, be a digital enabler to getting to that knowledge and getting that knowledge to the right people at the right time, as Marty and our other colleagues like Paige have spoken about. But and I think when you meet with the KM community and you see different organizations home it in different parts of the organization, and it has different success factors there, whether in terms of adoption or sponsorship or successful outcomes. And some of the homes that we would see, certainly in the life science sector anyway, would be, obviously it starts in R&D. So very often there's a big knowledge repository there in R&D. But very often that's locked in syndrome, again, very much silo based. And if you're not in R&D, you may or may not, you don't have a buddy in R&D, you may or may not ever get your hands on something that emerged during that phase of the life cycle. Obviously, a lot of organizations, we'd see it in tech ops or MSAT or global manufacturing, which might have process owners and product owners, and they become the custodians of the knowledge associated with the product or process they're responsible for. I think in more recent years, certainly with innovation and continuous improvement coming along, and with a lot of the work that's going on around quality culture, we're seeing more of the quality function being less like intense about their compliance role, and seeing themselves more in a role of acting as a conduit and a facilitator of getting this knowledge to flow. I think ICHQ9 or one, and our good colleague, Professor Kevin O'Donnell, has done huge work in making sure that the quality function, who has typically oversight of the risk management function, is now sees themselves having to also, adopt the KM program and integrate that. So we see it there. And of course, in more recent times, the IT or digital transformation team, as you've said, Val, have often now ended up with tag team tennis. You're on KM is now because you guys know how to pull it all together. But, I guess traditionally, where a lot of at least the explicit knowledge and the explicit knowledge around training and education has ended up, with the L&D function in the, more traditional organizations. And Laurie, you've just written 2 papers with Marty and some other colleagues outlining that practical approach to KM for improved business performance and growth. And you were particularly looking at, early stage companies. And I think that's the key here. In the same way, Val, that you said it was a little bit novel for people to hear you talking about linking, KM to the QRM and the risk-based decision making. I mean, if we're not reducing the risk to the business, then what are we doing? What are we engaging ourselves in? And similarly, for those, if we're not trying to enhance the business performance through reducing the risk, then why would we be exercising ourselves? So, Laurie, more on that maybe later. But from your own experience of organizations and even from your own research, what do you think about that traditional L&D function being seen as the home of KM? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, there's a couple of things. One, I think it is a nice natural fit in a sense that there's a lot of knowledge, obviously, that's coming through, tacit knowledge. If that gets integrated into learning experiences, procedure writing, normal, just regular trainings, onboarding material. That's a great place for that to live, survive, and then pass on to the newer people as they come into the organization. So there's that positive piece of it. You upskill people a little bit faster. You've got a repository where that knowledge is stored. Presumably you have the capability in your learning system, or should be at least, changing, modifying, updating as regs change or industry expectations change. And it builds that stronger culture of learning, that you were just talking about. And I think we can all agree that learning organizations make us stronger. It challenges us, asks us questions, brings about behaviors of curiosity. When we're making decisions, we should be exploring, learning, and understanding, and asking those questions. So I think all of that is very good, if KM were to reside in that organization. Okay, so there's obviously a downside. One, when anything resides within a singular organization, there's that fear of that silo. Oh, now it's owned by learning and development, or the learning organization, the department. So therefore, they're going to drive all the things. It's their responsibility. They're accountable. It's sort of like when anything lies in quality, then quality owns it, right? But yet, really, in reality, quality is sort of owned by all, right? That philosophy and thinking. So I think that's the downside. Then it becomes that tacit knowledge becomes really only associated with a training experience. It has to get built into, so if it doesn't, where does it go? Does it live anywhere else? How does that information get passed along? And if I'm the one that owns the knowledge, like maybe I'm in a manufacturing or production area, but the L&D organization owns knowledge management, does it kind of get removed from me as the person who maybe, or the functional area that owns that knowledge and that expertise? So it kind of gets removed away from that. It becomes very centralized. And I think we've all read articles on centralized versus decentralized organizations. What's the best way? It depends, all of that kind of has to get thought through. So I do worry when anything resides anywhere, but realize that my background with some of my experience has been quality risk management. It's another one. It's another enabler from ICHQ 10. It's right alongside knowledge management. We were just talking about how they work together for risk-based decision making. And when those things get plopped into an organization, are they run by quality? Are they centralized? Do they work with everyone? It's the same struggle. So I would worry, but there's also some great benefits. I think, where I landed, and I think, Value and I have talked about it too, where I landed, and I saw some of your comments, is that maybe it's centralized, but make sure that its tendrils are everywhere and it's integrated everywhere. And how do you make that happen? Maybe that's ambassadors within other functional areas. Maybe it's a governance structure. I think a KM governance team was talked about. I don't want to go on further than that. There's probably more conversations we can have in this session, but that's where I'm landing with learning and development, Nuala.
Yeah. And I think it's fine if the learning and development department has transitioned away more than just doing a name change, from what they traditionally did, which was the training management
Yep.
function. And again, even now with all the digital tools, a lot of our training is done, through digital processes and apps and organizational platforms. And my concern for that is that it's a one-to-one kind of engagement, and it depends on whether that experiential learning is really built in. And we all know the 70-20-10 concept of learning, and those learning platforms, and certainly the digital ones, where you have to sit through a module and then you have to click, and do some validation or assessment at the end. I think I've seen data from Compliance Wire that was spoken about at a conference last year, that many of those modules, it's the click,
It's less than 30 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't even matter how many pages the SOP is. They will just
they
click
managed
through
to
it.
get through it. And because and who knows what's going on in, in the background. They could be just letting the thing run. So if it's just that training piece, which is only the 10% of adult learning, then I would be pushing back very severely on saying, well, L&D shouldn't also, have the goose with the golden egg with the knowledge, because they won't be treating it like an asset, like
right.
Paige Kane, our Dr. Kane has written about. But if they are really transformed into an experiential learning organization where there is coaching and mentoring and there is opportunities for people to work alongside other team members and learn as they go and then slowly take over those responsibilities themselves, then that is a great place to ensure that that tacit knowledge is flowing and that continuous improvement concept of learning, and making sure that that knowledge is getting folded back into the organization, whether that's in explicit assets like SOPs and training curriculum, or whether it's in, communities of practice or whatever that might be. But I have, it's not that many organizations that we come across, particularly because of the regulatory requirement for the training records to be available, that we really come across and find, really enlightened L&D that isn't constantly getting dragged back to try and look at, training compliance requirements, which is hard because trying to keep on top of that is a big job in itself. Val, what's your thoughts on if KM resides and is renting a room in the L&D function?
Yeah, I think there's a risk that knowledge management could just become training content.
Mm.
But, there's also a likelihood that it would turn up when it counts, though. I mean, I think L&D is capable of building a culture of knowledge sharing. They certainly have, a range of toolkits, and they probably have the capability of ensuring the knowledge is used when it's needed, because knowledge alone won't protect patients. Competence is what protects patients, and I think L&D has the capability of linking the two. So, if the purpose of KM is to build decision competence, shorten learning curves, reduce repeat errors, then it's a good home. I would have some worries, though. Currency would be a problem. I mean, L&D needs, the knowledge needs to be current and updated, and that requires a flow of knowledge into or in L&D. So I don't see it as a capability that they can do on their own. And then, knowledge is also must consider integrity, and quality are good at that. So
Yes,
can I make a case
indeed.
for quality?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I hear you. And just look, going back to what you shared earlier about that linking KM to risk management and risk-based decision making, and indeed how AI can, become an enabler to that flow of knowledge, a digital enabler and a co-worker in that process. Tell us a bit more about how this might be a more optimal home then for an AI-enabled KM strategy and program.
So I came at this homeless idea from the perspective that, effective knowledge management is critical to risk-based and risk-informed decision-making. And KM, I think, has a very key role in ensuring that decision makers have access to accurate, timely, context-rich information, knowledge of past failures and successes, risk-reducing insights across the product life cycle. In pharma, a decision's only as good as the knowledge it's based on, and poor knowledge can be a hidden risk multiplier as well. So, KM can enable compliance, quality, risk reduction, innovation, and the function that owns QM does have responsibility for ensuring it's accurate, accessible, and that it's used to reduce uncertainty. So I thought quality might be a good home. So I came up with 5 pros and 5 cons as to why quality might be a good home for KM. So let me go through them. 1, first pro, risk-based decision-making is core to quality. And, quality functions are already mandated to reduce risk through systems like QRM, Kappa, deviation management. You mentioned those, Laurie. They're generally owned by quality, and managing knowledge enables them to, managing knowledge management as well would link knowledge to those activities and to the critical risks and issues and vulnerabilities that they are dealing with. Second point, I think QA typically owns and manages the doc management system and controls validated documents and procedures and change management systems. And these are formalized, curated knowledge assets, and they're the sort of truth within the organization. So QA are the custodians of verified knowledge. And I think that aligns with the need for reliable knowledge in regulated environments. So from a regulatory lens, if knowledge must be documented and retrievable and reliable, then I think quality is a natural steward of that information. They can be relied upon for accountability and traceability, maybe similar to the last point, but I think quality provides a governance structure that manages version control, source reliability, updating, regulatory readiness, and it may be best placed to apply taxonomies and ontologies and all those other things knowledge management talks about as well. My fourth point, I like this one the best. I think quality interacts with all departments, especially during investigations and audits and changes and issues, etc. And they have a visibility as a result to how knowledge flows or doesn't across the organization. I think they're used to working in this cross-functional environment and moving information and data and knowledge around. So I think that positions them well. And then finally, I think, they're a conduit to compliance, but also to continuous improvement. And I think quality would ensure that knowledge is used not only to meet compliance, but to drive preventative actions and continuous improvement. So I think it's a possible good home. Now, having said that, I come up with 5 cons as well, which I might as well share with you as well. I do worry that quality might focus on control rather than flow. We just have that kind of DNA for, documentation and procedures and, and if knowledge management becomes just another control mechanism, I think we'd risk stifling knowledge. Secondly, I think KM is about culture and, aligning it with a learning culture sounded very healthy to me. I'm not sure quality is the best home for it if that's what you're trying to encourage. I think, and this was my next point, there's a perception of quality as a policing function. So would staff withhold knowledge rather than sharing it with quality? There's that danger as well. Technical functions often move faster and are more aligned with operational decision making. So maybe again, the flow wouldn't be as fast if it was with quality. And finally, I think quality people mightn't have the skill set to use the tooling that L&D have, instructional design and coaching and facilitation skills, they're not skills we generally hire for in quality. So, maybe that wouldn't work either. So having said all that, I think quality brings the governance and the risk lens, which is essential to reliable knowledge. But I agree with Laurie, the best outcomes might come from a hybrid where quality ensures integrity, L&D assures transfer and uptake, and maybe there's a case for the technical departments to bring currency and relevance. What do you think?
Yeah, you've won me over. And again, I loved your thoughts on the compliance and CI. Obviously, a lot of the work that I do is around continuous improvement. And, the more we can embed continuous improvement into the quality system rather than this status quo, oh, it's validated, so whatever we do, let's not touch it, which we don't want that. Q10 has been telling us for many, many years now we need to do continuous improvement and innovation. And I think there is just an outright expectation now that you can't just stand still. You have to be able to demonstrate, even through the CPV or OPV, ongoing process verification and continued process verification programs, there is an expectation that you're looking at your trends, that you're looking at your, outliers, that you're looking at your data sets intra-batch and inter-batch, and that as a result of that, then you're going to look at where can we improve. And I think you are right that the problem of perhaps being seen in that control function, or we're going to have to go into change control mode here, and and it gets into the too hard basket, and then people might not want to share who are in the operational departments. So that would be a fear for me. But if, where the quality unit has the right mindset and is nurturing that culture of excellence, and are working towards seeing themselves as, facilitators in the organization, rather than, custodians of the compliance, or keepers of the faith, in terms of compliance. Then I think that there is a good role for quality to take this on. But, it strikes me that, of course, we want them to work cross-functionally, and the more cross-functional that they see themselves. Of course, the GMPs have kind of set this up that, they're independent and therefore they're separate. And sometimes I find that they're physically separate, that they're in quality towers somewhere off down the back of the site in another building. And they're not integrated into the daily workflows. And the more when you see, the likes of manufacturing quality, MQA on the floor and quality on the floor, and being part of the ops team and being seen as team members, and in support of, rather than the police or the sheriff function, then all the better. So, where they are bringing those people cross-functionally together for investigations and various things like that, if they were to think about that in terms of how can we create a learning environment, not just solve the current deviation or the current investigation as a single point, corrective action that we have to do, but think about these much more expansively around, yes, we have a task that we have to close out the current issue, but we can look at it in that preventative mode and look at, what other learning are we doing by bringing the right people together here and creating that knowledge flow. So I do see where you're coming from in terms of, are they going to be more about control and less about flow? And it's all about flow when it comes to knowledge. It's not about storing the knowledge and harvesting the nuts and keeping them for the winter. It's about making sure we get that knowledge to flow to the right people at the right time on any given day. But, it strikes me that, as well as working in that hybrid mode, with what, where Laurie has talked about, with the L&D function, when they're much more, involved in that instructional design and coaching and experiential learning, hopefully. What would be the problem with having some L&D folks working within the quality unit, who have those skills, who don't come from a traditional quality background, but are actually there as support resources within quality to look at opportunities of, that piece of knowledge that was discussed in that investigation report, or, during that meeting, or during that deviation closeout. That's all knowledge. How do we harvest it? How do we get it shared? How do we create more of a learning environment around those single point solutions that many of the quality folk are busy trying to close out CAPAs in 30 days, and things like that. So, of course, I like the hybrid idea, but also we can have people with different skill sets coming, with, and similarly with AI and digital transformation, rather than trying to always, build the bridges between these silos. Actually hire some of those cross-functional people into the departments and have them working within the hive, rather than having to try and continuously build bridges all the time. And of course, my experience is that what happens there is things fall between the stools very often. And there's a disconnect, and that currency issue that you talked about, Val, where, they come up with a good idea, but by the time it's implemented, all the knowledge it's last year's knowledge, and we've made another 100 batches, and where's that knowledge gone, and how are we building that into the current discussion. Yeah, I'm inclined to think that knowledge is a good place. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there is, AI is going to disrupt all our thinking here, perhaps, because if you look at decision making, and you look at the new legislation out in Europe, the EU AI Act. I mean, and let's just accept for a minute that, probably quality people make the most critical decisions in an operation in terms of patient safety and patient risk. Then, according to the legislation here, and probably this will translate to best practice and into our GMPs and into our updated Annex 11, is that there will be a requirement for a human in the loop in AI decision making. And that human in the loop has to develop a competency of explainability. They will have to be able to explain the decisions that AI is supporting them with, and how AI reasoned. Even if they're only partially use AI, they will have to be transparent about it and explain, the recommendations or the outputs of AI. And this, I think, will inevitably then bring quality people closer into those, I suppose, those technical processes, those digital processes. They will, require an understanding of modeling and training data and everything that goes with it in order to explain those decisions. And so I think the knitting pattern of quality decision makers and knowledge management and AI design and development and deployment and training is going to kind of maybe change the thinking and the need and the requirements here as well. So, it could be a real disruptor here.
Yeah, it's not just a could. I think it is going to be a real disruptor, and even the speed at which it is already, almost involved in everything. I mean, literally, you can't open your computer now. Even if you go to your search engines, you're going to have an AI agent there, or available to you, and whether you're supposed to be using them or not using them, and everybody is, and But you're quite right that verification and validation of, what were the inputs, what data sets were used, how do we know, what the model was, and how did that model determine, come to that conclusion and the recommendations that were coming out of that, and what level of rigor have you put around ensuring that that's, there hasn't been any hallucination, as they call it, and that the recommendation is sound and solid, and that's what you want that human decision taker to be doing. So, Laurie, any thoughts on that disruptor concept?
So, yes, 100%. And it's funny how I have also noticed the same thing, how quickly we went from talking about it for a long time and what AI could do, and it scared people and all of this, to now literally every day, I feel like there's some new enhancement that's being added to some site I'm interacting with, or my computer itself, my email. It's almost overwhelming how many services can evaluate what I've written to make sure it's okay, provide options. That's become a bit much, but I also appreciate and love that I can use it to kind of give me a little bit more information, or a place to sort of go and start some research maybe, and dig into even regulations, things like that. But I did want to go back to the knowledge management question again around where should it reside? And I wanted to close out with, I wonder if we even do another topic at some point for the podcast of, do we get fixated so much on where it should be versus realizing it's everywhere? And
Yeah.
what part does a functional area own? And how do they go about even asking the questions of what they own of that piece of it? And I think you kind of, at the end of your conversation, Val, I actually wrote a question down of, do we ever ask the question of ourselves, what part of KM do I own? Like, what part of that? It's not so much, do I own any part of it? It isn't. It's what part do I own? How do I execute to that? What are the questions I need to ask myself? And so maybe that's a whole separate conversation we need to have, of not so much where does it live, but it lives everywhere. And that's always like
Yeah.
kind of sort of ambiguous, right? It lives everywhere. Okay, great, Lori. Like, who owns what of it? And maybe that's the question we need to ask: is what part of that do I own? How am I responsible for it? How do I execute to it? And how do
Are
I
we
measure success?
generous with it? Are we
Yeah,
generous with it as well?
yeah,
Mm,
Talk about
mm,
knowledge sharing, but we don't talk a lot about knowledge generosity, which is a
mm.
willingness to
no,
share, and
Yeah.
which takes time. Time is another thing that came up a lot at the summit. The fact that it would be all much better if we had time, and that the people who have a lot of knowledge are generally knowledge rich and time poor,
yeah,
and don't
Yeah.
seem to be able to find the bandwidth to share, and creating
Mm,
those opportunities for them. But you're dead right, Laurie. That can start with self too.
yeah,
mm, mm.
yeah,
But the only thing I would say on that, and it's an and rather than a but, it is about that, knowledge sharing being everybody's job. But if we don't define that as part of their role, that they're stewards of the
yeah,
knowledge that they
yes,
gather, if we don't give them time to do that as part of their job description, if we're not saying you are a knowledge steward for, these processes that you're an expert in, or you're becoming an
yes,
expert in, or and it's that succession planning as well, of saying, well, what new knowledge do we want you? Not just competencies and skills. We focus a lot on developing our people in terms of what new skills they're going to, or abilities they're going to gain. But all along that, they're gaining knowledge in terms of gaining those competencies. And we don't talk to them about the fact that they're a curator of that knowledge, and that they should seek and have opportunities to share that. And literally, with some of the younger team members, getting them up to the lunch and learns and saying, okay, I want you to talk at 3 lunch and learns this year, or talk about the projects that you're working on, or how you found it, or what was difficult, or what was what you'd like to do more of. And
yeah,
actually getting them to and giving them the space to do that, and the time to do that. But you're right, Laurie, knowledge is everywhere. But I still feel, and it goes back to the work that again, Marty, Lipa, Paige Kane, and even to some extent myself did in the early days, around the fact that if we don't have a knowledge management strategy, a strategy that drives where, and have some structured. Val started the whole conversation of saying, of course, when you get a lot of KM specialists in a room, what do? They do brilliant knowledge sharing, both formally and informally, in structured ways and semi-structured ways. If we don't actually have somebody who's driving the bus in terms of, here's our strategy, here's what the expectation is for people in our organization to share knowledge, or to curate knowledge, or to harvest their knowledge and make sure that it goes back into the systems somewhere, not just, as we often say, sent to SharePoint to die. And if somebody isn't running that program, if there isn't governance around that, and it just won't happen. It won't happen because people are time poor. Everybody's busy. And unless there is a structured and semi-structured and formal and informal ways, it's a little bit like we talk about the level of formality in ICHQ 9 or 1, and that there's a spectrum of formality. We have a spectrum of formal and informal methods of how we get that knowledge to flow across departments, and within departments, and even, as I say, that critical issue of talent retention and succession planning within roles. That's all about knowledge flowing through the organisation, and building resilience, because we're not allowing some certain subject matter experts, who may also be expert knowledge hoarders, to practice hoarding techniques, or worse still, exit the business with their knowledge under their arm, and nobody's managed to gain that knowledge from them. So I still think we do, even though the knowledge is everywhere in the business, if we don't have some custodian for the program and the strategy, and then set the expectations around the practical things, like getting communities of practice, like getting mentoring circles, and lunch and learns, and pre-mortems, which we love, and post-mortems. We're very good at the post-mortems when there's a deviation or an investigation, but we're less good at saying, oh, here's a pre-mortem. Let's sit down and think about all the things that could go wrong. And again, a great risk management activity, but totally 100% seeded by the knowledge in the room, you know? You can't have a pre-mortem unless you have the human experience. AI bot is not going to help you trying to do a pre-mortem unless we start to build that into our systems and saying, here's all the things that might go wrong. What will we do if this happens? And what will we do if who's going to be in charge of making a decision if that happens?
I don't know why that's so hard. I wake up every day at 3 a.m. thinking of all the things that are going to go wrong.
Exactly.
That's just you, Laurie. That's just you.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, listen, so much to think about and reflect on there. Now, as usual, we'll be back on a monthly basis with a range of topics and a mix of guest interviews and what's new and our book club. Now, for July, we are planning to have a Risk Revolution Knowledge Cafe. So get your questions into us either through LinkedIn or through connections with us. And we'd love to discuss them on the July Cafe, Knowledge Cafe and Risk Revolution. On anything you have. In August, we'll have our book club, and Val, you're going to post the books into LinkedIn this week, I think. Or are they up there already?
No, I'll post them now this week, and we will ask our listeners to read them over the summer, and then in the August episode we will review them, and hopefully we'll have comments and questions from our groupies as well. So we've picked 3 books, 1 book each. Nuala, I think your pick is The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson. And we'll post that on LinkedIn and a few comments on why you picked the book. Laurie, I think you're suggesting Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette. And regular listeners may recall it was recommended or referred to by the organizer of the Knowledge Summit, Barry Byrne, when he was on his podcast. So that raised our curiosity in terms of reading or rereading that book. And and then I was very practical and true to the old technical roots, and I picked Quality Risk Management, A Practical Guide, which is a new publication by Jim Vesper and Amanda McFarland. Now, that book is distributed through the PDA. It might be a little trickier to find, but, you know, I guess as QRM professionals, we need to read technical books as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, I'm such an Amy Edmondson fan. I'm also going to do a little bit of a mashup between The Fearless Organization and The Right Kind of Wrong, which I've loved as well, which is that book around learning from mistakes as well.
Yes.
So, but she has lots to share. She's a fabulous author. So listen, please do subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and new episodes will miraculously make their way into your feed. We have our LinkedIn Risk Revolution podcast page, so please do join us there and feel free to message us there with your thoughts and ideas. And most importantly, thank you for listening. And what are we sharing in the show notes? Well, we have the link to Laurie's to integrating knowledge management into QMS for early stage companies, a practical approach for improved business performance and growth, part 1 and 2. And we also have Knowledge as a Currency of Managing Risk, uniting QRM and KM from level 3 as well. So we'll include those. So it's a goodbye from Nuala.
Goodbye from Laurie.
Val.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. See you all again next month.